Hi everyone, welcome to November 2023 First Time Film Watches. Yeah, we're almost at the end of the year, and I watched a decent amount of movies for this month. So we're just gonna jump into it. Yay! So without further ado, let us begin. The first film we're going to talk about is Steve Jobs, directed by Danny Boyle. Now, we're not going to talk about this one for too long because covered on the podcast. If I ever say that I'm not going to talk about a certain film for too long, 9 times out of 10, it's because we've already talked about it on the show. So I'm just going to, from here on out, assume that you guys know that that's what that means. And if I ever say that, you'll kind of put 2 and 2 together in your mind of like, oh, he talked about this on the podcast. I should go listen to that. Yeah, you should. It was an interesting, well-rounded discussion, but I will talk about it a little bit. So Steve Jobs, directed by Danny Boyle, came out 2015, written by Aaron Sorkin, which I think is an important aspect to point out with this film. And it's good. I like it. It's not my favorite, and I don't think it's something that I could really connect with too much, just based on, one, I'm not super interested or invested in the story of Steve Jobs, just on a base level. I think that that's something that maybe not necessarily goes over my head, but just on a surface level, I can't really get into because I'm not someone who really cares about Apple or Steve Jobs or tech companies or anything of that sort of ilk. But I do like this film overall, and I think that the writing of it is very strong. You know, Aaron Sorkin has a knack for creating stories of this kind of ilk where it's a lot of fast-paced dialogue, a lot of like walk and talk sort of stuff, and I think it works well for the subject of this film being about the character of Steve Jobs. And it's one of those movies that obviously there's probably some creative liberties taken, there's some sort of fiction spun in this web of based on a true life story, but when it comes to creating a narrative, I tend to lean more towards go for it rather than, you know, being a stickler for historical accuracy, which, I mean, if you listen to our Napoleon discussion, you'll kind of understand like my viewpoint of it. But I like Michael Fassbender a lot in this film. I think that he's really fitting for the role, despite how he doesn't really look that much like Steve Jobs. And this is something, again, we covered on the podcast. I think he embodies the behavior of it. And even if he doesn't necessarily match 100% with how Steve Jobs behaved when he was, you know, still in our corporeal realm, you know, rest in peace, I think that he is able to bring sort of his own take to the character and really makes the movie fresh and interesting and engaging for me. I also didn't hate Seth Rogen in this film. I'm always worried that when he pops up in a movie that I'm supposed to take him a little more seriously in, that I won't be able to. And he's very reserved, very held back, but I think he gives a very meaningful performance in this without it standing out too much or being overly distracting. So yeah, Jobs I really liked. Listen to our full discussion. I think you'll get both Mac and I's perspective on the film. He loved it a little more than I did, but I still think it's a good movie overall, so I'd give it a 7 out of 10. Next up is Priscilla, directed by Sofia Coppola. This is the first Sofia Coppola directed film that I've seen. The only other thing I know about her is the fact that she was in The Godfather Part 3, and that's all I'm gonna say about that. But this movie, you know, I've seen previews for it. It's kind of popped up on the radar. You know, I tend to kind of pay a little bit of attention to what A24 movies are coming out, and it feels like a not so subtle answer to the types of issues that I had with the Baz Luhrmann Elvis film, in that movie feels like it sort of bombards you with a lot of the fast-paced editing and the sort of like quick cuts of it, and thrusts you into the high-octane world of what Elvis Presley was living through. And I kind of liked that about that movie. At the same time, I could understand how other people wouldn't like that about it, and also there's just issues with certain character writing in Elvis, most notably Tom Hanks's Colonel Tom character. Some would say I'm the villain of this here story. It's just so cartoonishly stupid. But this movie feels like a direct answer to Baz Luhrmann's film in that it's slower paced. It focuses more on Priscilla, obviously, because it's, in the fucking name of the thing. It more so concerns itself with her perspective and the relationship that's established between her and Elvis Presley when she's 14 years old. And there was some speculation about whether or not this film would touch on that sort of thing, and it does, but it does it in a way that feels very indirect, kind of safe. This is a movie that's more so concerned, in my opinion, about the production design and the tone and the atmosphere more than anything when it comes to the presentation of this film. Not that I would say that the performances are bad or even secondary, really, because I do think that the girl who plays Priscilla, pop her name on screen, does a really good job, and you can kind of believe that she's portraying a 14-year-old going through the different ages and the different stages of her relationship with Elvis Presley. And they do a really good job of that, not just like with makeup or anything, but with her wardrobe and kind of her behavior as she sort of changes and grows throughout the film, and I really like that. And I also think Jacob Elordi is really good as Elvis himself. He's a very, very tall boy in this film. One thing that kind of bothered me about this is that the structure of it is a little bit repetitive. There's a lot of like dry humor moments in this between her and Elvis, and their relationship is presented as almost like a sort of quirky sitcom at points. But still, though, I like those moments of their relationship despite how repetitive this movie can get sometimes. And it is a bit of a slower pace, it is a bit of a slog at moments, but I mean, I think that the tone of it complements it very well. This movie has quite a sort of warm, sweet, almost like too sweet feeling to it that I could see getting under some people's skin, but I think that it works for the sort of juxtaposition of Priscilla not really having a childhood or like a moment to enjoy her teen years, because they're so much consumed by this one person, and it kind of shows you how much her life revolves around Elvis Presley at every given moment. So the movie is kind of juxtaposing that with a tone of a very like wonder-like setting where it's a lot of like, it almost feels candy coated in a way, where it's just very fluffy, very lighthearted, very like kind of like red and white, and almost like candy cane imagery, I would say, for lack of another term. But I think it works as sort of like, oh, it's in opposition with what the themes of the movie are going for, and I do like that quite a bit. So yeah, moving on from Priscilla, I think that it's a good film overall. I liked it. I had some issues with the pacing. There were some things that I kind of wish they delved more into in a level of which it would help me keep engaged with the film a little bit more. Not that I wasn't completely, but there were certain moments throughout that felt like they were kind of losing me. So this one I give a 7 out of 10 as well. I do like it overall, and if I ever checked it out again, maybe I'd bump it up, but who knows. It's not one that I think is going to stick on my radar a whole lot. Next up is Coco, Pixar's Coco, directed by Lee Unkrich. I watched this with Megan. It was her turn to pick a film, and she picked Coco because I'd never seen it before. This is a Pixar movie that I needed to kind of check out and go back to because there's a lot of more recent Pixar that I just haven't gotten around to, and I liked this one. I thought it was really well done. I thought the animation was beautiful. This, I think, is probably one of my favorite Pixar movies as far as the animation goes, and just the beauty and the level of detail that they go into with this film visually. I also like the voice acting performances. I thought that the kid who voiced the main character was really great, and I like the music as well. Of course, this is a Pixar movie about music, not entirely dissimilar to something like Soul, also another recent Pixar film that I enjoyed about at the same level, I would say. And yeah, I think those elements of it are really well made and kind of tie the whole movie together very nicely. One thing that I kind of have a gripe with about this film is it feels like the pacing is almost too quick, and that's not a common complaint that I usually have about films. Usually how I feel about them is that they go on for too long and that they overstay their welcome, whereas this one, I feel like I could have used more in the way of developing the villain and developing the overarching story between the boy trying to find a connection to his family and his family history, because that's kind of the crutch of the movie and how it's set up, is that he's learning about himself and his heritage and what it means to be an artist in relation to your family. It's not entirely dissimilar to something like The Fabelmans, where there's that conflicting sort of theme of wanting to be a good artist versus having those relationships with the people around you that you care about, and the sort of sacrifices that you have to make for that sort of thing. And I would have liked it if this movie delved into it a little bit more, kind of like The Fabelmans does, but it becomes more so about the subterfuge of certain relationship expectations. Not to get into spoilers, but there's sort of like a subversion of expectations going on when it comes to that sort of thing. And it's one of those things that like I wasn't too big on, because at this point when it comes to Pixar movies, they can become a little predictable with that sort of thing. And I just kind of knew going into this movie that, okay, there's got to be some catch to this, right? Because there usually always is when it comes to these Pixar films. And other than that, I really didn't have too much of an issue with this. I think that it is one of the better Pixar films of recent memory that I've seen that I haven't checked out before. So if you haven't watched Coco, I suggest you give it a shot, because I really do enjoy this one. This one's an 8 out of 10 for me. Next up is Job, the Ashton Kutcher 2013 Jobs film that came out before the Danny Boyle 2015 one with Michael Fassbender. It's directed by Joshua Michael Stern, and I purely watched this just because I was curious, because we had talked about the Danny Boyle film, and so I had that thought experiment of, let me watch this and see how it goes. Obviously, it won't be as good as the Danny Boyle film, but maybe it's got some things going for it that I'll enjoy. Maybe it does it in a different way, a unique way that will set it apart from the Michael Fassbender performance. And boy, does it set itself apart, because this film is god fucking awful. This is probably one of the worst films I've seen all year. Maybe one of the worst films I've seen, period. There's so much about this film that's just broken, that's so schlocky, dumb, poorly written, poorly edited, poorly fucking acted by Ashton Kutcher. I cannot separate Michael Kelso from him in this film. It just feels like he's another dude bro trying to play this tech genius, and it comes across as such a stilted and unwarranted performance from Ashton Kutcher. This film, from the word go, starts out in such a shitty way that I had virtually no hope once this movie opened and you started seeing stuff happening on screen. There's so many editing choices and faux pas in this that make me just scratch my head and wonder how this even got made. How did this even get past the editing stages of the production of this film? There's moments where there's swelling orchestral music and he's in a field, and then it cuts to him in India, and it cuts between these two things, and this is only in like the first 10 minutes, by the way, and it makes no fucking sense. There's no reason for these scenes like this to happen. It just happens for the sake of happening. Why are we watching this? This is pointless fucking garbage. There's moments where he's interacting with characters and the writing is just so poor and cliched. There's moments where you can tell this doesn't even feel like a first draft. This feels like somebody took notes in their fucking phone and they just decided to go with it when making this film. Josh Gad plays Steve Wozniak, and it's such a bad caricature-like performance of this real-life person. At least with Seth Rogen, he added some depth and nuance to it, and you can tell that there's more underneath the surface of his character because he's actually giving a good performance, and you can read that on his face. With Josh Gad and how this character's portrayed and written, it's like he's reduced to nothing but a fat slob who's just a nerdy piece of shit. That's all he is in this film, and that's all his character is. And so when there's scenes like when he's leaving Apple, you're supposed to care, but you have no reason to care. There's no established sort of reason to give a shit about this character when all we know about him is that he's fat as shit and he's nerdy, and that's all you get. This movie fucking sucks ass. There's also moments in this where Ashton Kutcher has like weird Heisenberg moments, which I've dubbed, where he'll be like driving down the road and then he'll just start screaming. Like, this is so cringe. This is fucking cringe. Why are we doing this? I already ranted about this in the 40-minute bonus segment for episode 59, which came out recently. Please check that out. Yeah, I had to rant to so many people about this film just because of how upset it made me. And I don't even give that much of a shit about Steve Jobs, like I said when I was talking about the Danny Boyle film. Like, I have no real dog in this fight. It's just, as a movie, this fails on virtually every single level. And I'm just going to leave that at that. This is a 1 out of 10 piece of shit, worthless garbage movie. Absolutely insulting that I had to sit through this fucking garbage. Next up is M. Night Shyamalan's The Village. This is the movie that he made after Signs, but before Lady in the Water, I believe. And I watched this because I'm going through M. Night's filmography of the ones that I haven't seen yet, kind of like how I did for David Fincher. And yeah, this is definitely an M. Night Shyamalan movie. Take that how you will. That can mean a lot of different things to you. But no, going specifically into the film itself, it's sort of like a period piece in a way. Of course, in similar M. Night fashion, there's a twist. There's always a twist when it comes to M. Night movies. And this is one of those twists that I kind of knew about going into it, but it didn't really affect my enjoyment of the film overall. I thought that it was fine and that it kind of holds up in a way, even if you go into it knowing the twist. But how is the movie itself? How does it hold up as a film? I think it's all right. I've got a lot of issues with it, but I'll get the positives out of the way. First of all, I think the performances are really good. This movie is sort of carried by Joaquin Phoenix in the first half and then Bryce Dallas Howard in the second half, although she's, I would say, more in the movie than Joaquin is. But I think that the performances are good overall, with one very notable exception, which I'll get to when we talk about the negatives of this movie. I think that the structure of it kind of works in a way. It feeds you information in a way that I think works overall for the pacing of this film, and I really didn't have too much of an issue with how fast this movie was going, or the runtime, or the structure of it in nearly any way. I thought that it was pretty interesting and overall flowed very nicely. I do like the set designs. I do like a lot of the atmosphere that's going for in a lot of different moments of this film. Kind of gives it that sort of creepy, woodsy, almost horror-like movie vibe. And I think that some of the music works pretty well too to the film's advantages on a technical level. I think that in of itself is something to note as a positive thing. Now I'm going to get more into the negatives. I think that the biggest thing that this movie gets wrong is Adrien Brody. I think that he playing this character how he's playing it. Let me explain. Adrien Brody is playing a character that is supposed to be mentally handicapped, and it's one of those things that I can't help but think of Tropic Thunder, where Robert Downey Jr. tells Ben Stiller, never go full R word. And this is a movie where it feels like Adrien Brody goes full R word 100%. It is laughably bad. It is like almost borderline insulting when it comes to portraying somebody with mental illness, and it's so cartoonish and surface level and doesn't offer any sort of level of nuance to it whatsoever. It doesn't feel like he approached this with any kind of care, and I don't know whether or not to blame Adrien Brody or to blame M. Night. Personally, I probably would blame both of them, because it feels like one of them maybe should have stepped back and said, hey, maybe we shouldn't portray someone with a mentally handicapped in a way that feels cartoonish and insulting. It almost reminds me of Rosie O'Donnell in Riding the Bus with My Sister. If you've ever seen that, you'll know what I'm talking about. So yeah, Adrien Brody, very almost insultingly bad performance when it comes to portraying someone with a mental handicap. Other issues I have with this film, a lot of it has to do with the twist and the story elements and a lot of the writing. There's just some logic issues that don't make sense to me. The way that it's structured and put together on a story level feels very convoluted. It feels like a lot has to happen in order for this to work that almost feels out of the realm of reality to me. And of course, it being an M. Night movie, it's one of those things where like the premise of it is the hook. The premise of it is why you're going to go see it. And not knowing the twist, this film kind of tricks you into thinking it's one type of movie when really it's another type, but it's still sort of that first type of film that you're watching anyway, that it doesn't really feel like it has much of a consequence. It just feels there to be a sort of gimmick of, oh, look at this twist, isn't that interesting? But I feel like twists only work when they make you look at the film in a new, different light, and I really don't think that this film does that in any sort of nuanced way. You know, a movie like Sixth Sense works because once you learn the twist, you can go back and watch that film and recognize all the different things that are different and changed and that make a little bit more sense to you now that you're watching it from that new lens after you learn about what's going on in the film. Whereas this one, it doesn't really feel like there's much in the way of that making the movie any different from when it would be when you first watch it. So yeah, very deeply flawed film, but I still enjoyed it overall. This will probably waver a lot upon different rewatches if I ever check this out again, which, you know, I very might well not. It's one of those films that I'm not eager to really go back into or to experience again, but it's a film that I do like to talk about, and I think that there is a lot to say, both in a negative and a positive aspect of it. So this film, The Village by M. Night Shyamalan, I give a 6 out of 10. Deeply flawed, but I still liked it to a degree. Next up is The Road to El Dorado. This is a DreamWorks animated film. So this one I'm kind of cheating. It's also directed by Bebo Bergeron and Don Paul. Interesting name, Bebo. I'm kind of cheating when it comes to this film because I actually have seen this before, but it was sort of a childhood favorite of mine, and when I say childhood, I mean real young, like to the point where I didn't remember much of what happened in this film. I remembered certain parts, certain like small moments that were going on, but I couldn't have told you anything about the story or what the plot was or anything going on with the characters really. And I rewatched it. This is one of the films that we watched on the plane to New York, Megan and I, after downloading some movies onto our iPad, and I like it. It's definitely not as, it doesn't hold up that much. It doesn't hold up that well, and let me tell you why. I think that the story is very basic. It doesn't feel like it has much in the way of depth when it comes to the script or the plot in any way. I think that the characters in of themselves are kind of interesting, but it doesn't really feel like you get to learn much about them as characters. You're just kind of there with them in the situation. You don't learn a lot about their relationship with each other, their backstory, the kind of like meaningful moments that I wish were throughout this film just feel like they're missing. And with a movie like this, it feels like it can sort of foster a sort of like meaningful character relationship film. Something like Puss in Boots: The Last Wish or Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, where it feels like those films are so much fun and vibrant and colorful, and on a technical level they're great, but also they're well written with great characters who have depth, have this emotional weight to them. Whereas this film, I feel like it's missing quite a lot of that, and it kind of kept me from getting as into it as I would have liked to. Also, there's a lot of, I guess, 3D animation that's incorporated in this that I don't think holds up well at all. It dates the movie quite a bit. A lot of it is like the gold that they come across, like a lot of the gold piles of shit that they accumulate throughout the film, that it just feels like they wanted an excuse to like use a lot of like the 3D stuff that they had at their disposal. Like, oh, look at us, we're pioneering 3D technology in 2D animated films, and it doesn't hold up. It's very dated and it looks very janky and kind of drags the film down quite a bit. You guys want to say hi to Piper? This is Piper. Say hi. She loves being held. That was sarcastic. She does not like being held. She is a lap cat, but on her own terms. We are pro-consensual cat cuddling in this house. Hope you guys enjoyed seeing Piper for a hot second. You get a little bit of a better look at her. You know, hopefully she didn't look too pissed that I was holding her. Anyway, back to The Road of El Dorado. There isn't too much else I need to say about this film. I do like the 2D animation. I like the voice acting. I think it's Kenneth Branagh and Kevin Kline and Kenneth Branagh, and they both voice the main characters. And I think that they do a good enough job with the voice acting. Some of the songs, you know, they're a little bit annoying, but some of it does kind of get stuck in your head as a bit of an earworm, so I count that as a positive in a way. Got some music that lingers with you after you've watched the film, at least for like a few days or so. The Road to El Dorado, I'm giving a 6 out of 10. It's probably closer to a 5, honestly, than a 7. Didn't really hold up from my memory as a child into current day. And I think that the best kids films, in my opinion, can apply to both children and adults. adults, and I feel like this is one that is quite more so kid oriented than anything else. Next up is The Killer, directed by David Fincher. We also talked about this before, so not going to get too deep into it, but this is a film I enjoyed quite a bit. I really love the performance that Michael Fassbender gives. I think that he's perfectly cast in this role. This is a film from David Fincher's filmography that is a little bit divisive amongst fans of David Fincher and just fans of film in general. I think that there's multiple ways to read into this movie. Some of them I don't necessarily agree with. I'm not going to discount anybody's view or interpretations of what David Fincher intended with this movie, but I'm also going to state right now that I'm of the firm belief that David Fincher, at least to me, wanted to just make a straightforward action thriller film that's very stylistically made, starring Michael Fassbender, with all the filming techniques that David Fincher has been able to apply to his other films over the years, while sprinkling in some kind of satirization when it comes to this type of character, you know, sort of like the Sigma male, literally me type of characters that we've been getting in a lot of different acclaimed movies that a lot of film bros and a lot of film heads like to talk about when it comes to it being their favorites, and characters that can make people take the wrong interpretation away from watching a movie. You know, a character like Driver from Drive, or Patrick Bateman from American Psycho, or Lou Bloom from Nightcrawler. You know, the characters that are really good at their profession that are also kind of pieces of shit that we shouldn't really be praising, but they're interesting, well-written characters overall. So therefore people sort of take the wrong interpretation of when you watch a film like that and they say to themselves, oh, I like this character because I think they're literally me. And, you know, that's kind of a meme at this point. But ultimately, my point of it being that I think David Fincher was very aware of what he was doing with this film, in that it's not as deep as a lot of people think. There's a little bit more going on with his intention of satirizing the character, and I think that that's pretty much as far as it goes. And I'm always interested to hear and read other people's interpretations when it comes to this being a film in response to people's perception of his filmography, or it being a kind of look at him as a director in relation to the character being very methodical and detailed and blah blah blah. You know, I'm always interested in reading and hearing about that sort of thing, but I am of the firm belief that I don't think it goes quite that deep. But still, this is a film that I enjoy overall. I really do like the methodical nature of it. I like the different buildups that go in between each major event of this film. The presentation's great. I really do like the music from Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross, and I really think that this is a film, even though it's sort of ranked lower amongst his filmography, I still quite enjoy. And I think that says a lot about David Fincher as a filmmaker, where there's not a ton from him that I think is necessarily a bad movie, maybe other than Alien Cube. So yeah, The Killer, I give an 8 out of 10. We talk about it on the podcast, so you get a little bit more in-depth views on how we perceive that film. So check that episode out. It's out on the channel right now. Next up is The Holdovers, directed by Alexander Payne. I saw this in a theater with Megan, and this movie is fantastic. I think that Paul Giamatti knocks it out of the park with the performance of this movie. He's fucking hilarious, and I don't think I've ever laughed as hard in a theater since I saw Barbie with my friends. I think that when it comes to the humor of this film and the jokes and everything, it's just so well written and so well acted and performed, and I just really couldn't get enough of what this movie was offering to me. I think that this is absolutely fantastic, and I would recommend this to anybody who is a fan of film, a fan of Christmas movies, a fan of really great humor, and a fan of movies that offer that sort of wonderful, kind of like warm Christmas time aesthetic without being too cutesy or hallmarky. I'm very impressed by the kid in this movie. I'll pop his name on screen because this is, I guess, one of his first acting roles ever. And I think that he does a really great job in playing that character in this movie, the sort of like lead young boy character. I think he does a fantastic job of that. And of course, I gotta shout out the lead actress in the film, pop the name on screen. I would pull it up on my phone, but that's what I'm using to record, so there you have it. I'm sorry my memory's so shit. Can you blame me? I'm almost 29. I really do enjoy this film overall. This is, I think, the best movie that I've seen all year that has come out this year, and this is probably my number one in terms of 2023 released films. And I've got a list. I'll probably make a video sometime soon, so keep an eye out for that. You know, after the new year has come and gone, I'll go through all those films, and you know, we'll have a good time with that video. But for now, The Holdovers, excellent film. 10 out of 10 for me. I can't recommend it enough to film lovers and, you know, people who love Paul Giamatti's lazy eye in the film. Next up is Tuanewan, directed by Robert Luketic. It's a card counting movie, and yeah, it's certainly a film. First of all, this movie is very dated. You can tell that this is a movie that it kind of like thrives off of like the sort of early to mid 2000s aesthetic. You know, it's got like that type of music, it's got that type of clothing, and it just feels very cheesy, kind of dumb. There's a lot of moments in this film that kind of lose me. Overacting to the nth degree from, you know, the younger cast members. Kevin Spacey just kind of looks bored throughout this film a lot of times. It doesn't really feel like he's bringing that much to the table, you know, which I don't feel too bad about saying because he is kind of a piece of shit. But I mean, when it comes to a lot of different films he's been in, he's great, he's excellent when it comes to the acting. But in this one, it just kind of feels like he's phoning it in. And really, one of the biggest things about this film that I kind of take away as being more of a negative is that it's quite forgettable. There's a lot about this movie that I'm just even failing to remember, and I didn't even watch it that long ago. It's just one of those films that when I think about it, all I remember is it opens with the main character narrating over what's going on in the scene, going, "Winner, winner, chicken dinner." I immediately could tell what kind of movie this was going to be. Kind of like mediocre script. That's the thing with this movie too. I wouldn't say that it's horrible. I wouldn't say it's the worst movie I've ever seen, and I don't even think I'd say it's like egregiously bad. I just feel like it's one of those that didn't really do much for me. Is almost sort of enjoyable only on an ironic level of just kind of how shit it is, but I don't think it's shit enough to be something like The Room or Fateful Findings, where it transcends the so bad it's good viewpoint of it, because I can't get behind that. This movie is so unspecial to me that I'm gonna forget about it in like 6 months entirely. You're gonna ask me what happens in 21, and I'm just not gonna be able to answer because it's been wiped from my brain, because I filed way more important shit in the filing cabinet of my hippocampus than the movie 21. I'm sorry. This is a 4 out of 10. It's whatever. Next up is No One Will Save You, directed by Brian Duffield. It's a kind of modern take on an alien invasion. I say modern take, but you know, there's really nothing that kind of sets this movie apart from other sort of alien sci-fi invasion movies. This kind of feels like almost a combination of War of the Worlds and Signs at certain points. I would say more so with Signs, because this is a film that has very little dialogue. Caitlin Dever barely says anything in this film, and I do like her physical performance. I do like her acting when it comes to a lot of what her character needs to do physically, and I think that she does a good enough job with that to kind of carry this movie in a way, and she's probably the biggest positive I take away from it. Another one I like too is there's a lot of interesting cinematography in this that I think kind of holds it up from being a mediocrely shot alien sci-fi film. One thing that I have to know, and this is a problem I have with a lot of alien films, especially modern ones, is the alien designs don't really feel that inspired. It's very much straightforward, like green men with big eyes and big heads with like lanky limbs and bodies, and that's just kind of how they are. It's very like standard alien type shit, and I feel like maybe they did that on purpose to kind of make you think, oh, this is gonna be like a cheeky pulpy alien film, but I think that this film is PG-13, so there's not really much in the way of pulp or weight to a lot of the violent acts in this film. It's just very kind of safe and standard, in my opinion. I do think that the overall premise of this is interesting, and the first half of it to me is stronger than the last half, in that it's sort of about this girl who's isolated from her community because of something she did in the past, and everybody in her neighborhood kind of hates her. I think that building off from that, kind of constructing an alien narrative is interesting of itself, but where it goes kind of flatlines for me a little bit. Still, I don't think that this is a bad movie. It's just one that I kind of wish had a little bit more unique flavor to it, and I wish it had more to offer in terms of the premise that it was giving us. So this one's a 6 out of 10 for me. Not going to talk about it too long. It's on Hulu, I think, if you want to check it out, but otherwise, it's just kind of okay. Next up is The Hunger Games, A Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. I saw this with Megan. I have watched all the Hunger Games movies at this point, so I was, ready to jump feet first into Songbirds of Snakes or whatever the fuck. So a bit of background about the Hunger Games movies and my perception of them. I think that they're all right. I have a lot of issues with the first one, specifically with the filmmaking and the kind of like cheap, quick cut way that it's edited together. I like Catching Fire the most, I would say. It's got the highest production value. It feels like it's got a tighter story to it, and it's more concerned about the characters in themselves rather than the initial premise of it. Mockingjay Part 1 and 2. It feels like Part 1 didn't have enough story to it, so they stretched it the fuck out, so the pacing's really whack. And then Part 2, it feels like they had too much going on, so then it just goes by at lightning fast speed and too much is happening, and it feels just overstimulated with all the stuff going on in the script. So I was curious about how the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes was going to go, and honestly, out of all the Hunger Games movies in this series of films, this is probably the one that I think is the best, which is weird because I was totally going into this film expecting it to be kind of bad, especially from the trailer, because in my opinion the trailer isn't great. They leave off with the line of Peter Dinklage saying, "Listen to that, that's the sound of snow falling," and shut the fuck up. That's so stupid. I hated that line, and I rolled my eyes even when he said it in the movie. As far as the rest of this film goes, I don't think that it's necessarily bad. I have my issues with it, of course, but it's one of those films that I was kind of surprised at how not shitty it was. So I guess that's something to take note of. I like the acting from the main character, the main actor who plays Snow, a young version of Snow. I think that he does a good job, and I like the rest of the cast well enough. I think that they're okay. Rachel Zegler's good. I don't think that anybody really particularly stands out as being bad, and I think that the cast competently does an okay job of portraying the characters and delivering the lines how they need to. I also think that the special effects were interesting and well made for the most part. I think that some of the filmmaking was kind of unique and very notable. One of the things that I want to point out, and this is something that I said to Megan as we were leaving the theater, it feels like they sort of tried their best to step back from the young adult dystopian aspect of this franchise that's kind of like culminated. Hunger Games is known as being sort of like the spearhead of the dystopian young adult genre of films that has kind of been ushered in between like 2010 and 2016. I feel like this movie sort of looks at itself and says, we're going to concern ourselves more with the characters and their relationships and developing this guy over the course of 2.5 hours than we are about the setting and the premise and how things work overall in the world of Hunger Games. And I really appreciate that it does that, because it feels like it's sort of letting the world breathe, and it's a little bit more unique in the way it portrays Panem. And of course, this is set 75 years or like 65 years or whatever before the first movie. So you get a little bit of a different feel as far as like the atmosphere and the time period, but at the same time, it doesn't feel too dissimilar to where you wouldn't be able to recognize that this is set in the world of Hunger Games. One of the biggest things that I have with this as far as a gripe is it feels like it goes a little bit too quickly into how this character develops over the course of the film. Obviously, it's a film about Coriolanus. I cannot pronounce his name, so I'm just going to call him Snow. Obviously, this is a film about Snow, the villain of the main franchise, so you're wondering when this kid is going to go from kid who has big ambitions but still has like good intentions to somebody who's an absolute monster. And you're wondering how they're going to do it. Are they going to do it in a natural way? Is it going to go more of a slow burn, or is he going to start out kind of a piece of shit? And I like how this movie starts, and I like how his character's portrayed at the beginning of the film up until probably the last, I would say, 45 minutes of this movie, because it feels like the transition from good to bad goes way too quick. It feels like that sort of narrative happens almost at too breakneck of a pace, and it almost feels like, to me, they could have justified it if they split this up into another film and we get to see that progression of his character a little bit more slowly, but at the same time they probably didn't want to risk it being a Hobbit situation where they're making too many films out of just one book. So it's one of those things where I don't know necessarily how they would have solved it, but I feel like there could have been a way for them to make it so that it feels more of a natural progression than what we get in just this single film. Because honestly, the 3 acts in this movie, it feels like they could have justifiably made 3 separate films out of all this, and maybe they could have like made a mini series out of it, make it so that it's a longer progression of his character going towards evil, and I think that would have worked a lot more. I'm not going to talk too much more about the Hunger Games. I feel like I've covered pretty much what I wanted to cover. This is a 6 out of 10 for me, kind of more towards a 7 honestly than a 5, and I do think that out of the films in this franchise, this is probably my favorite one. But again, there's a lot of flaws, there's a lot of structural issues, there's a lot of character development problems that I have with this that I think could have been solved if it was structured in a different way. But if I ever revisit this franchise, maybe it'll go up, maybe it'll go down. We'll see what happens, but for right now I think it's pretty solid. Oh, this is directed by Francis Lawrence, by the way. I don't know if I mentioned him at the beginning of this, so I'll include it now. Next up is Next Goal Wins by Taika Waititi. This is also a Michael Fassbender joint, and it stars him as a coach who is forced to go down and try to make the American Samoan football team, football being soccer, qualify into the World Cup series of games. And, you know, with a premise like that, I think it can work well on a humorous level. That being said, I think that this film's alright. I don't think that this movie is as bad as a lot of people are saying it is. I think that there are moments throughout that are quite funny, are quite humorous, that I had a decent chuckle at while watching this. I think that Taika Waititi is to some degree just naturally funny, and I think that he uses it to his advantage quite a bit when making a lot of his films. I don't necessarily think that this film is nearly as strong as something like Jojo Rabbit or What We Do in the Shadows, or even Thor Ragnarok to some degree, because I do really like Thor Ragnarok. And I feel like that there has been a notable sort of downgrade when it comes to his perception of what humor is throughout the movies that he makes. So Thor Love and Thunder, I think he took the wrong message away from what people liked about Ragnarok and applied it to Love and Thunder, and it kind of has negative consequences now because of that. And I think that trend is sort of continued into Next Goal Wins, where it doesn't feel like anything is taken very seriously. There is moments of sincerity throughout the film, but because of the amount of humor and because of how the humor is delivered, it doesn't really feel like anything is sincere in a way. And I think that the character moments that you do get feel watered down because of the way that the humor is presented. Camera work really isn't anything super special. There's not a whole lot going on in terms of technicality of this movie. I think that a lot of the music that they use is kind of bland and cliched. Just overall kind of a disappointment, but I still don't think it's necessarily a bad film. I just think that there's a lot about it that's sort of holding it back and making it way more predictable and safe than it could have been. So this one I'm giving a 6 out of 10, kind of closer to a 5 than a 7. There's a lot about this movie that I just wish was overall different. So hopefully Taika's next film can kind of elevate it, but for right now it just feels like that this is kind of another disappointing entry into his filming journey. Next up, I watched Prometheus, directed by Ridley Scott. This is of course part of the Alien franchise, which I guess some people didn't know at the time when this film was being released, so that's kind of an interesting concept to think about at the time of this film coming out in what was it, 2011. But yeah, Prometheus, also Michael Fassbender. I guess I'm kind of on a Michael Fassbender kick. Numi Rapace, Logan Marshall Green, who I mentioned in my upgrade discussion in the last video, I believe. This film, I think, is fun. I think that it's got a lot going for it visually and technically. And I think that the tone and the overall pace of it is engaging and well done. I think a lot of the problems sort of lie with the script and the characters, in that this feels like kind of a more predictable alien action sci-fi film with this setting, where characters will make decisions and you can easily see what's going to happen to them coming from a mile away. When it comes to the Alien franchise, you know, say what you will about the later movies, but it does feel like each time they kind of reinvent themselves, and it's sort of an excuse to establish a more nuanced presentation when it comes to another entry in this franchise. And I think that this film doesn't really do much to make itself stand out in comparison to a lot of the other films in this series. I think that Ridley Scott is a good filmmaker overall. It just feels like that there's a lot about this movie that is kind of watered down and doesn't really feel like it's fully committing to what it wants to do. Still though, I like this film. I think that it's pretty solid. I remember a lot of people kind of have a more polarizing view of it, but it's one that I enjoyed for what it is, and I don't think that there's too much else about it that I can offer in way of discussion that hasn't already been said about this movie. So I'm going to give it a 7 out of 10. Pretty solid, pretty okay. Next up is Saltburn, directed by Emerald Fennell. That's quite a unique name, and it's got Barry Keoghan and Jacob O'Lordy in it. And it's about a little British boy who becomes friends with a big British boy, and big British boy invites the little British boy to live with his family at his house over the summer. And yeah, it's pretty wacky. Let me get this out of the way. There's a lot about this movie that I love. I think that there's quite a bit about this movie that sets itself apart from other films. It's unique. The way it's presenting the premise is interesting. It's intriguing. It's engaging. I love all the acting. I think that a lot of the writing and the character dialogue is very solid, and Barry Keoghan and Jacob Elordi perform their characters very well to a T. And all the other supporting castmates are really talented and really good. Where this movie fucks me up, and where I think it drops the ball the hardest, is the last 20 minutes or so. I think that this movie sets up so much to make it interesting and engaging, and I was kind of into what was going on, and then the last 20 minutes happen, and it spells everything out for you that you already knew. So the movie's kind of treating you like you're stupid. And I really wish it didn't do that. I really wish it was a little more subtle in the way it was presenting these things. Leave some room for a certain amount of doubt of what's happening, but let us come to our own conclusion. Let us come to our own interpretation of it. It's almost like this movie couldn't help itself and kind of takes the more recent M. Night route of, oh, we're going for deeper themes, we're going for deeper character moments and nuance throughout this, but let us just tell you what's going on anyway. Let us literally sit you down and tell you what's happening so that there's no room for ambiguity whatsoever. There's no room for any sort of interpretation that you can make on your own, because we have to spell it out for you. And I fucking hate that. I hate when a movie does that, because it disappoints me to no end when that happens in a film that I'm relatively enjoying in the moment. I think the cinematography is great. I think a lot of the technical elements of this are really well made, and I really do like the kind of tone and atmosphere this movie goes for. It's just, God, why did you do this? Why did you spell it out for, like, I was having such a good time with this, and then you come along and you just drop the ball and you fuck it up in the last 20 minutes. This is like when a sports team is ahead by 20 points and then the losing team in the last quarter just makes an unbelievable comeback, and so you, being a fan of the team that was ahead, you're entirely disappointed in why they just fucked up. And this is like that. I don't usually like to use sports analogies for this. You know, I'm not Mac, but fuck, man, they dropped the ball hard with this. So this is a 5 out of 10. If the ending wasn't as shit as it was, this would probably be at least a 7, maybe an 8 out of 10. But man, this movie, I think, just absolutely lets go of the gold. It totally just drops the ball. Next up is Insomnia, directed by Christopher Nolan. This is his third movie that he made after Following and Memento. Got Al Pacino in it. It's got Robin Williams. And yeah, I think that it is okay. I think that there's a good reason why this movie isn't quite talked about as much when people discuss Christopher Nolan's filmography. It's because there's a lot about this movie that feels quite meandering. I don't think that the pacing really does it any favors. It's quite slow. It's kind of a slog, and it's, to me, just a little bit more of an elevated standard cop drama, but it still feels like it has some of that standard predictable stuff in it. You can kind of see where things are headed. You can kind of see where it's going after a certain point. And it doesn't really do much in the way of separating itself from other psychological thrillers that I think do a better job with this sort of thing. I think that Al Pacino's fine. I think Robin Williams is fine. This doesn't really feel like a movie where either actor really had to try to give a good performance. It just feels like they were kind of relying off of their natural talent and not really giving it too much in the way of effort, which, you know, they're talented either way and they portray the characters well. It's just, it feels like there's sort of a missed opportunity when you have two powerhouses like that in a movie together, where I feel like it needed to have called for a little bit more when it came to their performances. Kind of ironic with a movie called Insomnia that I was struggling to stay engaged and interested in this film, and this is one that really didn't capture too much of my attention, especially when compared to other Chris Nolan movies, and even Memento that came out before it. I really like Memento, and I've wanted to rewatch it for some time now, but this movie just kind of feels like a sort of big step down from that sort of thing. So yeah, Insomnia I'm giving a 6 out of 10. Definitely on the lower end of Christopher Nolan's filmography for me personally. Next up is Dream Scenario. This is the last film that I'm going to cover in this video, and it stars Nicolas Cage. It's directed by Christopher Borgli, an A24 movie where Nicolas Cage as a professor starts appearing in everybody's dreams at the same time. And you know, this premise is interesting. I think the biggest thing to know of this film is Nick Cage's performance. Obviously, I think that when it comes to most movies that he's in, he puts a lot of effort into playing these characters and making them feel unique in almost every single movie he's in, but there's still an element of that Nick Cage sort of batshit energy that he brings to the table, and I really like that part of it. I think that that is probably my favorite part of this movie, because there are some moments in this film that are just really funny on their own, and at a certain point it almost feels like a series of vignettes that are happening revolving around his character that sort of feel like they could be isolated on their own. And I do like a lot of those single character moments where really the most we get from those scenes is Nick Cage acting like a dorky goofball. Where this film loses me is the last half, where it feels like it goes from sort of a dry, interesting look at this very unique character to a movie where it's very obviously trying to satirize cancel culture, and I really wasn't a fan of that. I think that, to me, this movie doesn't feel like it's going into any sort of unique territory when it comes to that sort of thing, and doesn't really feel like it's saying a whole lot about it. It's just pointing out that it's a thing that we've been dealing with in our current cultural climate, and it really doesn't feel like it has much to offer in the way of commenting on that sort of thing. It just feels like it's pointing at it and saying, oh, look at this is something that's happening, right? It's like, yeah, but what are we supposed to gauge from this? What are we supposed to get from you showing us this in this movie? We already know what it is. We already know what it's about. What are we supposed to take away from this? It almost feels like it's a similar gripe I have with Don't Look Up, where, yeah, cool, you're showing us this is happening, you know, we're watching a movie where it's taking place. What are you doing that hasn't already been touched on? What are you doing that hasn't already been talking about? You're not offering a unique perspective on this. You're not offering anything in the way of nuance or subtlety in any way about this. You're just telling us what's happening, and we're supposed to say that you did a good job of doing that. I don't think that that's how that necessarily works. I like Michael Cera quite a bit. I need to mention him. I thought he was good, and I was very pleasantly surprised that he's not playing his usual like mousy, like awkward teen type of character that he normally plays in a lot of his movies. I think that that was pretty unique and fresh. But yeah, man, after a certain point, this movie just kind of, it drops the ball. It drops the ball. There's been a lot of movies this past month in November that have just been kind of disappointing and mediocre, and I'm hoping that December's a little bit better when it comes to that sort of thing. But man, oh man, does this one kind of disappoint me the same way, you know? Yeah, I don't think that those moments in the cancel culture commentary work nearly as well as the sort of character focused moments that we get in the first half of the film. I think that this movie had a lot of potential to really be a solid character comedy with a little bit more going on under the surface than it ended up being, which is just a very surface level commentary on American culture and cancel culture in general. So yeah, not really a fan of it. Still, I enjoyed it to some degree. It is an enjoyable Nicolas Cage performance, and I think that a lot of the concepts and the way that they're executed is just interesting of themselves, like the dreams themselves and how they're portrayed to us on screen. So this movie I'm going to give a 6 out of 10. I had it at a 7, but after thinking about it a while, I bumped it down just because really the last half of it drags it down quite a bit for me. Really would have liked to see a better executed film revolving around this character played by Nicolas Cage. And that is it for November First Time Film Watches 2023. Thank you guys so much for checking this out. Like I said before, these will be monthly, going over each film that I watched for the first time during that particular month. So if you guys want to check out my thoughts on it, there are timestamps in the description for each specific movie. You can go through the list, you can see what movie I talk about that you're interested in hearing my thoughts on, and you can click on it and let it rip like a Beyblade, baby. Be sure to check out the podcast that is also available on our channel, as well as our website, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. Subscribe if you haven't already. Hit the like, hit the notification bell. Go hit up your mom for some nice mac and cheese dinner, whatever the fuck. And yeah, the December video will be out sometime in January 2024. We'll be starting our 2024 First Time Film Watches. Wowzer dowser. Anyway, I appreciate you guys checking this out, and hopefully you liked it, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye.